Okay, good evening and welcome to chapter 25 of the Living Marriage. Today we'll be doing lesson 8, part number 2. Lesson 8 is called The Art of Harmony. Basically, it discusses problems, shalom bias people have outside of the bedroom, right? Things that are outside of the bedroom, even though this book is about the bedroom. This chapter, this part, this section 8 deals with 4 chapters that are not directly related to the bedroom. Part 1 was an introduction. Here we do part 2, which is the first problem that the couples have. There are 3 problems enumerated. We're going to go through the next 3 chapters are the 3 different problems, main different problems that couples have that destroy their shalom bayis. Number 1 is differences. At the end of the last chapter, he says the couple has different backgrounds, different interests, or simply very different for any reason, including the natural differences between men and women. So this chapter is dedicated to how you should deal with differences in a marriage. He opens up, it's kind of an interesting story. An innocent divorced. There is a very common phenomenon that can destroy a marriage even when there is no real problem at all. I call this, the author writes, quote unquote, the innocent divorce. And the story unfolds usually as follows. At 1:30 a.m., I received a phone call from a hysterical parent that the daughter has been married for a month and a half and she wants to get divorced. Okay, they go into it. The daughter and the husband come and they tell this Baal Eitza over here who wrote a book. He knows how to solve all the problems in marriage. Right? Basically said that they're not meant for each other. Right? The husband enters and begins to explain, I don't have any complaints, but the shock from my parents made an unfortunate mistake. This marriage will never work. I don't know how this happened, but I made a very serious error. I thought we would be a perfect for each other, but now I see that we're completely different. We don't have a common language. You don't even have the same interests. Why should we both suffer for the rest of our lives? Let's be honest, go our separate ways, and we'll both find the person who is right for us. The only problem is that our parents don't understand. So we would appreciate it if you'd explain to them that we should get divorced as soon as possible before it's too late. That's what the husband says. The girl comes in and she says, I'm a completely regular girl, just like my mother, my sisters, and all my friends. I don't have any particular problem. For some reason, we can't get along. It seems to me that we're 2 completely different species of people. Maybe he's right, and we need to get divorced because there is no hope. So he basically tells them, listen, you're a man, she's a woman. You probably, since you grew up in a religious environment, you probably never had any experience living together. You're different. You're very different. And he says, before you make the next, I want to tell you one secret. All the points you've described are the differences between a normal man and a woman. Even if you get divorced, these exact differences will be found in anyone you choose to marry. You thought that getting married means going to the chuppah and immediately begin to live together with unity. This is not the case, and therefore the Torah teaches the couple needs to devote the first year of their marriage to recognizing their differences and using that understanding to build an inner unity. The rest of your lives together will be an opportunity for you to continue building a beautiful home on this foundation. Now, he says, which he said before, that the purpose of Shana Rishona is because you're strangers. I've heard this before. Why do you Shana Rishona? Don't have guests during Shana Rishona. You don't know each other. You have to spend time together. But it could be that might be fundamentally a good idea, but I think they confuse it with the mitzvah of Shana Rishona, which is the mitzvah of V'simach es ishto, which the man has to make his wife happy. So it's a little confusion because, he talks about, they all talk about Shana Rishona, about understanding your differences and, living together and working together through your differences. That's not what Shana Rishona is. Shana Rishona in the Torah is the man should make his wife happy. A little different perspective that the Torah has than apparently the greatest marriage safer in the world. I say that a little sarcastically. But he talks about something interesting. He's a bad advisor. At this point, I asked the couple if they had previously sought advice on how to improve the situation. The answer they did. Who do they go to? Who do you go to when you have a problem in the Haredi community? Who do you call first? You call the Rav. They call the Rav. They could find no common ground with him. He advised them. What should they do? What the Rav going to tell them? To perform acts of chesed with each other as much as possible. The help of Hashem will all work out. When I asked them if this helped their relationship, they tell me that it helped for about 2 weeks. Now, I find this interesting because the person who wrote this is a rabbi, I believe, Rabbi Moshe Shochatovitz, written by Remendel Weiss. He wrote it, but it's really the lessons of Moshe Shochatovitz, who was a prominent rabbi, I guess, that he was in close connection with a lot of big rabbis, Gedolim, supreme rabbis. So he says this type of bad advice caused 2 major problems. He gets on Rabbanim over here. This is interesting. Number 1, the Rav agreed with the couple that the lack of similarity was a problem. This is a big mistake. They are supposed to be natural differences between husband and wife, and a Jewish home is built as the couple embraces and unifies these diverse qualities into one greater entity. Number 2, the second mistake is the Rav gave advice that makes no sense. Wow, he's calling out rabbis over here. Before we ask for chesed, it will never make two people with differences more similar. Okay, could have told me. I don't believe in that concept of chesed at all, whether it's between husband and wife or between you and your friend. There's gemilas chesed. I mean, you pay back if someone does you a favor. Doing favors for no reason is not a good idea for anyone. It's not going to get you anywhere. It's not a good idea. It's not part of Judaism. But he calls out the Rav. I agree with him. Don't do chesed with each other. Now, he tells you, what do you do, right? So a man and woman, they're different personalities. Now, he's talking about the natural difference between a man and a woman. I guess that makes a lot of sense, right? Men are more in their intellect. Women, they reason things more. Women are more emotional. It's hard to get used to living with someone who thinks on a different plane than you. He's thinking, intellectually. He's trying to reason everything. She's emotional, right? And when she complains about something's bothering her emotionally, you try to rationalize it, or you try to give a reason to it, or why she shouldn't be happy, or she shouldn't be sad, or she should be happy, and she doesn't know what you're talking about because you're not speaking to her heart. And it happens a lot. I did this at the beginning of my marriage also. You try to, when you hurt her feelings or something like that, you try to say, no, 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 you don't understand. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I wasn't aware of such a thing. It doesn't make a difference. The woman is hurt. She's insulted. All you gotta do, there's only two words. Just say you're sorry. That's all she wants to hear. You're sorry. Even if you explain it to the best of your ability. No, you don't understand. I didn't try to hurt you. It was misconstrued what I said. It doesn't make a difference. She's hurt. She's hurt. Yeah, deal with that. And I say the same to a woman. I mean, I'm not teaching women over here. Women, it's hard for them to learn these things, but it's hard for women just know emotion. They only know emotion. And because they only know emotion, they can't use their intellect to, when usually a husband sometimes will be insulted. And when the husband feels insulted, they'll try to say, I'm sorry, but the husband wants an explanation. Women aren't that good at doing that because, it's easier to go from intellect to emotion than go from emotion to intellect. Because when you're in your emotions, it's hard to get out of emotion. When you're angry, right? It's hard to break out of anger when you're emotional anger, so it's harder for women than men. Usually just for husbands, just say you're sorry. That's all, just don't waste your time trying to rationalize it and prove you're right. Because who cares? If you're right, you're really wrong because you hurt her, and just say you're sorry. So that's the natural difference between a man and a woman. Then there's other differences between a man and a woman, which could be differences between a man and a man. For example, personality differences, right? Classic personality, right? One of them is extroverted, one is introverted. I said this in the previous lecture that I think somehow it's uncanny how always one spouse is extroverted, one spouse is introverted, or maybe they're both introverted, but one's looks more like the extroverted type and one's very introverted. Usually you don't find two extroverted people being married together or two very introverted people being married together. They usually have different personalities, besides the fact that men are intellectual and reason more, and women are emotional. So what do you do in that case, right? What do you do? So he says that marriage is not a peace deal. He says, why not compromise? Marriage is not a peace deal. He says, if you want a peace deal, right? If you want to make peace between you, where does he write this? He says it very clearly over here. Here, compromise. He says, this is a mistake, he says. Compromise is a mistake in marriage. He says there's 4 mistakes people make when they have differences. One is self-negation. They perceive differences as threatening their marriage, and therefore try to remove all differences between them. They try to remove differences. You're not going to remove differences. People have different. Compromise. Each side maintains their separate identity and makes various compromises to allow them to each live in the way they want as much as possible while still living under the same roof without fighting. Compromises and peace agreements are for 2 countries that want to live together without war. This is not the path of marriage. False. This I completely disagree. I'll tell you in a second. Fixing the other spouse, number 3, right? You're not going to fix your other spouse. Doesn't work. Midos perfection. This I agree with also. He says, I once heard from someone claim that people get married in order to perfect their midos in order that they'll be able to live with their spouse. Right? Why do you get married? Right? What's the question? Why are you getting married? To work on your midos, of course. Right? That's all the Musar Svarim tell you, all the Rosh Yeshiva tell you. To work on your midos. You have bad midos going in. She's going to straighten you out. He's going to straighten you out. Although midos are a very important part of life in this world, this is not the reason one needs to get married. Session Rosh will make it very difficult to build a foundation of love with one's marriage. He mentioned, the author believes, that the point of marriage is to unify the man and the woman and have a completeness that brings the Shekhinah into yourselves and your home. uh, Working on your midos on an individual basis is not the point of marriage. I couldn't agree with more. I don't think, I don't believe in the idea of working on your midos. I don't think working on your midos will ever help. I mean, there's no midos not written in the Torah because there's no such concept in midos. All the Musar Sfarim that talk about midos, and I've learned all the Musar Sfarim many times, and I can tell you that midos can be corralled, ignored, you know. But once you're presented with a challenge, it'll flame up. You think you've worked on kas, you're not gonna get angry because you're avoiding situations of kas. Avoiding situations of kas is not conquering the meat of kas, right? When you get into a situation where there's gonna be friction and you want something, other person's standing in your way, you're gonna get angry, maybe even more angry. It's pent up for many years. So there's no such thing as changing your midos. I don't think you could ever change a mida. I don't think you could ever make yourself humble, because the second people start honoring you, it'll get to your heart. I mean, there's no way of changing your midos. Midos, everyone, some people have, more desire, are more humble, right? They're more quiet, they're more humble. Some people are louder. Doesn't mean they're gaiva. The whole concept of gaiva, I don't think there's anything wrong with gaiva. Um, the problem with gaiva is when you talk about yourself in a way that's not true. You exaggerate. That's what an ego is, exaggerating your accomplishments that are not true. If you're saying if you have great, strengths you want to talk about. So, my phone, you like the... If you have great strengths you want to talk about, so, if they're accurate, you could talk about them as long as they're true and they're not over exaggerating. So that's the gaiva doesn't exist. Kas is really a bad midah. It's a bad midah, but it's just like a simon that you're Gehenna. That's all it is. Right? If you're angry, it just shows you're in Gehenna. If you're an angry person, it means you're living in Gehenna. People get angry. That's natural. I mean, whatever. But anyway, so I agree with him. Marriage is not for midos. Fixing your spouse is not going to help. You shouldn't ignore the differences, but the one thing he says which is not going to help is compromise, right? That is the way. That is the way to solve your differences, I believe. He says not. For example, and he says, why not compromise? This is prominent enough to devote a couple of pages to. Why not compromise? He gives a good example. It's a very good example. Let's look at a couple who appreciate Shabbos in very different ways. The wife loves Shabbos because it's time she can spend quietly with her husband and family, and generally doesn't appreciate guests who disturb this goal. On the other hand, the husband grew up in a family which always welcomed guests to their Shabbos table, and it's difficult for him to enjoy an empty Shabbos table. A couple that knows how to compromise will include that it isn't fair for either of them to get their way every time. Therefore, for example, they decide that every other week they will have guests. On the weeks that they have guests, the husband is very excited, and the next week when no guests will be at the table, he accepts this is what he needs to do for his wife. In his heart, he's already waiting for the Shabbos week and once again have his Shabbos enjoyment. Half of the time, the husband gives up his own desires for his wife, and half of the time, she gives up her desires for him. Let's look at the same story with a slightly different approach. The husband who grew up with a Shabbos table full of guests recognizes that although he loves guests on Shabbos, his wife wants to spend time with him on that day. Acknowledging his wife's desire, which is simply focusing on a different aspect of Shabbos, he embraces this perspective as an extended part of his own self by focusing on the positive value of her perspective. Spending quality time with one's wife is a very special opportunity and will strengthen the relationship, which, as we learned in the foundation, is a foundation of the divine presence in their home. So too, the wife tries to respect her husband's perspective and accept them as a new part of her extended self. Although spending time with one's husband on Shabbos is a special opportunity, having guests is like accepting the face of the Shekhinah. In this way, each side will find that every Shabbos is their Shabbos. Sometimes it will be a direct expression of their own natural desire, and sometimes one's extended desire, i.e. the desire of one's spouse. This is not a compromise. It is a perspective that allows the couple to use their differences to uncover a greater unity that expresses a beautiful harmony throughout their daily life. Okay, so he says compromise is bad. Don't one Shabbos guest, one Shabbos no guest. Not a good idea. What should you do? He doesn't tell you what to do, right? He says, this is his answer. His answer is, your wife is an extension of you. And the wife, her husband is an extension of herself. So just like he compares it when you're reading a book and you get hungry, right? You want to read the book. You also want food. If you get food, you have to stop reading the book. But you realize that part of you wants to eat, so you get up and eat something, and then come back to the book, or better yet, you eat while you're reading. That'd be more exciting. But you have to get up and stop your reading for that. So he says your wife is an extension of you, right? It's not that when you're not having guests on Shabbos, not that you don't want to. You want to. You want to eat, right? You want to fill that craving that you have for food. So the same thing with your wife, not having guests is fulfilling an extension of you. That's an extension. She's part of you. Marriage, you unify together, and that's the point of marriage, is unification. And she's a part of you. And when she's a part of you, it's just like your need for food. And similarly with the wife, right? She's going to have guests. Now, there's two problems with this approach. First of all, it's not true. Because at the end of the day, you're a person, and your wife is a different person. Not only is she a different person, she's also a different gender. So she has different, wants and needs than you. So if she's introverted and you're extroverted, you like to have guests. She doesn't like to have guests. Or most women like to have a quiet Shabbos table because it's better for their family. I also enjoy quiet Shabbos. I'm an extrovert. Once in a while, it's nice to have guests, but who wants all the people over there? Unfortunately, I'm in a situation where there are always a lot of people at the table. But they're not the people I'd like to speak with, so it doesn't really help me. So anyway, at the end of the day, it's not true. You can't fake it. Don't lie to yourself. If the wife is having guests and she's unhappy with that, I'm really enjoying it because my husband's an extension of myself. That's in place of your feelings, you're rationalizing your feelings. You can't tell yourself how to feel. You don't like it. You don't like having a lot of people at the table. And he doesn't like the quiet Shabbos. So the husband shouldn't tell himself, I like it because it's the extension of myself. My wife is part of me. I mean, it's a nice concept that, that you're unified and you're together, but at the end of the day, she's a different person. So you're removing yourself from reality. It'll never work. And eventually, it'll come to head, and you realize, I can't put up with this anymore, right? And the second problem is he doesn't offer a solution over here. Without compromising, he just says they think of the unification, they think of the extended part of themselves, and then when they have guests, she'll be okay with it, and when they don't have guests, he'll be okay with it. It doesn't sound like they're making a compromise. How are they deciding whether to invite people? It's not practical. Compromise means you're becoming practical over here. You have differences. Let's work it out. That's fair to both of us. And that is the best way to resolve differences just between man and a woman. And if they have different personalities, the man and the woman, one's introverted, one's extroverted, like this case. So in the case of personalities like that, you got to make compromise. That's a great idea. One job is yes, one job is no. Compromise is a great thing. After all, it's called shalom bayis, right? What the word shalom means? Peace. Right? He says, if you want peace, make peace between Israel and Palestine. And say if you want peace, that's what peace is for. Different countries, shouldn't go to war together. But shalom is called shalom bayis. It's called the same thing. It's not called yichud bayis. It's called shalom bayis. So at the end of the day, this is what he talks about. He says these chapters are for shalom bayis. Making peace involves making compromise. When you want to make a business deal, you want to make peace in countries, you want to make peace in your house, shalom bayis, you have to compromise. And it's important that you lay out all the feelings on the table so that you could actually make a compromise that works for both of you, that's fair for both of you. So number one, be realistic, and number two, be practical and say the compromise so it really doesn't hurt you too much, either one. He leaves off with a different type of difference that couples have. I don't know if he's specifically wanted to point this out, but this is the other type of difference. There's three types of difference between couples have. One is the natural difference between man and woman. That takes time. You get used to each other, right? The husband learns to say sorry when he hurts his wife. Maybe the woman could rationalize why she insulted her husband. That's problem number one. Problem number two is a different personalities, which could technically be two men could have different personalities. Man and a woman, different personalities. The best way is compromise over there. And the third type of difference is a difference in hashkafa. Now, it could be they grew up in different scenario and different lifestyles, which he's going to talk about in this example he brings, which is a very interesting example. And then there's oftentimes couples get divorced because one parent's not keeping halacha anymore or goes off the derech. So In those cases, it makes sense to get divorced. You can't live together if one spouse is not keeping the Torah and one is. It's just, we're talking about a Jewish book over here, a Jewish community over here. If one's keeping the Torah, their life is going to be just very different. Just, practically living together, and with the kids for sure, raising the kids together will be impossible. It's almost impossible to live together like that. But there is, a concept of different hashkafas that both fall into from Torah Judaism, and he actually has a very good example over here. Um, he met a couple. A very unique couple approached me for help. The husband, with payos and a shtreimel, was from a Hasidic Yerushalmi family, and his wife was an English woman raised with a classic British mentality. Even before hearing their problems, I couldn't help but wonder what possible connection could these people have with each other. The husband began to explain that he never intended to marry the Queen of England. She called her the Queen. It's funny, called her the Queen of England, who has no concept of how a Jewish home is supposed to look. He explained further, he had no intention of living with someone whose traditions all come from the nations of the world. This is a terrible problem, Ashkafa. You have to be Jewish. Everything you do has to be Jewish. Your dress, the way you teach your children, the way you talk, everything has to be different. His wife proclaimed, she was upset, I could bear the suffering of watching him eating with his hands. A Hasidic guy doesn't use a fork and a knife, he eats with his hands, but putting his feet on the table isn't civilized. How can I be expected to live with a person who acts like a barbarian? This is unfortunately the reality of some people that are. I just remember, the Mir Yeshiva. I was in the Mir as an Avrech for 2 years. I remember at lunch, they serve chicken wings sometime, which is really the lowest of the low. But I remember there weren't enough seats in the dining room. I remember there were lines. Some people don't wait for a table. Some people, like I did, if it wasn't a table, I would wait, in the aisles. It's a little, you try not to wait, on top of someone else's back. Some people did that. That was rude. You try to wait in the aisle till the seats freeze up. But some people, they don't have time for that because they have to get back to learning. So they take the chicken wings and they stand, next to the wall and start eating the chicken wings standing up, leaning against the wall. I couldn't think of anything more disgusting than that. Have basic manners. Come on. But these weren't necessarily Hasidim. Most of the Mir is not Hasidish. There are a lot. It is in Mea Sharim. So you have people with different upbringings. So he tried to resolve this issue. He asked the wife, "Why did you marry a Hasidish Yerushalmi guy? You're brought up in England with manners and culture." She told me that she was in seminary for 3 years in Israel, but she had lived in the home of her husband's cousin. She lived with a Hasidic family. I asked her to describe the experience in their home. She said, "It was truly amazing. 8 generations of family had been living in Jerusalem along with an elderly grandfather who was a unique individual filled with great wisdom. It was her dream to be able to build such a home." I had one small question. He asked her, "Did the people of that home also eat with their hands?" She nodded in the affirmative with a small tear resting on the corner of her eye. Yes, they did. And then he turned to the husband. I heard the husband ask, "Were there no Yerushalmi girls left in Mea Sharim?" It's a good question. Understanding the question, he explained that Mea Sharim has the most holy and modest young woman in the world. But who says that everyone needs to be so closed off from the rest of the world? I wanted a wife whose nose didn't end at the end of her street, but had a more open perspective toward the rest of the world. When I told my uncle that I was looking for such a wife, he suggested that perhaps the Queen of England would be the perfect match. So I called them back together and told them there was no mistake at all. Each of them received exactly what they wanted. She wanted a chas from Mea Sharim. He wanted a modest young woman with a broader outlook on the world. So they had different upbringings. Both of them technically be Haredi Jews. Hasidish, if you consider them Haredi Jews. The end of the story, he says, several weeks after the couple came to me, the wife's father passed away, and they went to live in England for a year and a half. When they returned to Israel, I stopped in for a visit to see how they were doing. The husband welcomed me and sat me down and honored me with a tea, a golden spoon, a real golden spoon, and a sugar cube, straight out of the storybooks. When I asked him what had happened to him, he explained with a big smile, "I got just what I wanted." So he was happy. This is the danger of confusing differences and deficiencies. At the beginning of the relationship, the couple perceived the differences in the spouse as defects which needed to be removed. He eats with his hands, and all of our customs are from the nations of the world. In truth, everything they complained about were not objective lacks, but mistakenly identified as such because they were so far from the other side's upbringing. On the contrary, each quality was a small part of a bigger picture each of them desired. This is true. You can have different hashkafas. You have different upbringings. Me and my wife. My wife grew up in a Haredi family. I grew up in a modern Orthodox family. When we got married, I was Haredi at that point. I'm probably maybe more Haredi than my wife. I've since cooled down a little bit where I'm not as Haredi as my wife, but it doesn't mean I'm not Haredi anymore. People ask me which box I'm in. You have to be in some box. I'm in the Haredi box. I vote for, UTJ, Gimel. over here in Israel, which is the Haredi party. How do you identify someone else? I mean, I live in a Haredi community here in Telstone, where my wife grew up. So you have to acknowledge that you have different upbringings. Part of the reasons that I've cooled off is because I'm more aware of the world, because I grew up in a world that was, more open minded, and so I have different perspectives on the world. And I'm I she brought up in a world where my wife was brought up in a world that was very Haredi. Certain things are like taboo, smartphones and things like that. But like the world I grew up in, even though there were no smartphones when I was growing up, but there's sort of like a weakness, that you call it a weakness, but it's sort of like a gateway for me to the rest of the world. Because that's the world I grew up. I grew up in not a secular world, but a world that was open to secular ideas. I went to college. My wife would never, none of her brothers would ever go to college. They went to yeshiva. They stopped learning secular studies already in high school or fifth grade or something like that. So it's a different perspective. When I grew up, I came into the Haredi world where I wanted my children to be raised in the Haredi way, and they are. They go to Haredi schools here in Telstone. And I have no problem with that. Even though my hashkafa was a little different, I would not describe myself as not Haredi. I think out of the box. My ideas are definitely not in the box Haredi, but you're supposed to think out of the box. But you can't be out of the box. So, even though I push certain limits in terms of what I wear, how I dress, or whatever, but there's certain red lines you can't cross over. And I've learned that. And to me, it's important to have a good marriage with my wife. And we have a great marriage. It was a struggle for me. Certain things I pushed through because I needed them for my YouTube channel, things that I wanted to do, to get a smartphone, to have the internet in the house and things like that. I needed these things, and I was able to successfully get some of these things. And some of these things, like wearing colored shirts is something which seems to be a red line. I don't know if I'll ever cross that. Um, but it's okay. We have to compromise, and on Hashkafa also you have to compromise. I'm not someone who's giving up halacha. I keep halacha. If something is explicit in the I might have a more, lenient approach. But if it's something that's halacha that involves me and my wife, I would call a rub. For things personally, like I eat OUD. I told my wife, listen, I grew up eating OUD. I don't see anything wrong with it. Moshe Feinstein technically says it's okay. So I enjoy a lot of foods that are OUD. So you don't have to eat it. The kids don't have to eat it. But me, I wanted to, she's okay with that. So you work out compromises here also. It's a way to compromise. As long as you don't want to, I'm not giving up Judaism. I'm not going off the derech, quote unquote. I'm not giving up halacha. Halacha has many different opinions in it. Some are more mekel, some are more machmir. When you make a decision for your wife or for your kids, that's a different decision. But for yourself, I think there's one. My wife has compromised a lot also. But what's interesting about the story is that at the end of the story, they went to England, and the husband cooled down a little bit because he was the more firm one, and she was a more cultured one. The way of she acted like the nations of the world. But I find this to be true a lot of times when you go to a different community, when you live in a different community that's not as closed. Okay, they call it, it's like a derogatory word to say patuach, they're open. It really means open-minded, but it's derogatory to say in this community, Haredi community, to say someone's patuach, he's open. He's supposed to be closed, sagur, like Haredi community here in Telstone. Even Telstone, not just a Haredi community, as like Beitar, Kiryat Sefer, or Meir Sharm, of course, but still it has its limits. So, but I find, I obviously if we would go, me and my wife would go and live in America, let's say, or live in, a community, or has, a more open perspective. Even let's say like Harnof or something like that. I think, I would get more of my wishes, but it's okay. The point is that, I'm keeping halacha and I want to remain Jewish, and hashkafic differences, it really has to do with the reason I went back to a lot of these things. I grew up, these things were okay. So computers were okay. Technology was okay. So it's really a different perspective, different upbringing than my wife. Hashem brought us together. He mentions the Stipler says that he says, you must know that any couple that stood under the chuppah has a chazaka that it was for their best, even in this world. It has a chazaka, an assumption that it was he says that the Stipler told him 10 times, right? If in any case it still doesn't seem to be the case, meaning it looks like there's a problem, look again. The Stipler told the author, look again, look again, look again. If there seems to be a problem, there's a way of resolving it. The way of resolving it is basically through compromise. He says not through compromise, but I think he's getting a little philosophical. Practically, you have to make compromises and know where the red lines are and make compromises and make it work. And if you can do that, you can keep good shalom bayis. Hope you enjoyed today's lecture. See you in the next one.